welcome you to the sermon at First Presbyterian Church on August the 30th. We appreciate that you have joined us, and if you don't have a church home, we'd like to invite you to come. We are having worship services in the fellowship hall as well as the sermon online, and we hope to start worship back in the sanctuary September 13th, but that's going to depend on the direction of the current pandemic. I'd like to invite your attention to Matthew 16, verses 21 through 28, and speak to you about the cost of discipleship. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." And Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." When Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. What good will it do for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they've done. Truly I tell you, some are standing here who will not taste death until the Son of Man comes in his kingdom." In Matthew 16, Jesus had asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered various things. John the Baptist, one of the prophets, and a variety of answers. And then Jesus made it very personal. "Who do you say that I am?" Indeed, all of us have to answer that question. What does Jesus mean to us? Peter, speaking for the disciples, said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, the Messiah." Well, Jesus instructed the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. He often told people, "Don't tell anyone that I am the Messiah. Don't tell them who healed you." And there was a reason for this, because you see, the Jews believed that the Messiah would be a great political and military leader, and that he would come and establish an army, drive out the Romans, reestablish the kingdom of Israel. And so the term Messiah had political and military implications. Now, if the Romans thought that Jesus was a revolutionary and that he was coming to overthrow Rome, then they would have sent troops into the community and pretty much annihilated everyone in the community. So Jesus is warning them, don't tell people I'm the Messiah, because of the political and military implications. Now, the disciples and Jesus never did grasp, Jesus did, but the disciples never did grasp what Jesus meant by being a Messiah. So Peter, when Jesus had begun to talk about his approaching death and going to the cross, Peter took him to one side, and Peter was probably trying to protect Jesus, and he said, "Jesus, you're wrong. This is not going to happen to you." He had forgotten about the many times that the Jewish leaders had let it be known that they wanted to kill Jesus. From the time that Jesus began his ministry, the Jewish leaders considered him an enemy and that they wanted to get rid of him. Well, they feared the people would have a riot if they attacked Jesus. But what they did not realize was there was another reason. God had a plan in mind And that plan would be fulfilled on God's time and not man's. Jesus often said, "My time is not yet come." Even when he was being threatened, "My time has not yet come." The religious leaders thought Jesus was very strange. He associated with people they thought were sinners. Now, these were not necessarily bad people. The sinners were those who did not observe the law and the traditions of the elders. And Jesus touched lepers, and he touched dead bodies, which he was not supposed to do. And he violated their Sabbath by healing on the Sabbath. He even had the audacity to cleanse the temple and attack their greed and their abuse of God's temple. Now, when Jesus was approximately 2 years old, Magi visited to find out where Jesus was. Naturally, because they thought he was the king of the Jews, they went to the palace of Herod. Well, when Herod heard that there was a king of the Jews, he issued an order after the Magi left to kill every boy, baby under the age of 2. Jesus was not there. He and his family had already gone to Egypt. But nevertheless, Herod carried this out. You see, Herod was very jealous of his position, and he was in trouble with Rome, and he had killed many of his family members that he thought threatened his regime. And so he thought a newborn king might depose him from the throne. Well, Jesus, through God's revelation, had escaped with Joseph taking the family. Now, Peter first was commended. Jesus told him, when he acknowledged him as Messiah, "You have received a revelation from the Father. Flesh and blood did not reveal this to you." Well, in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, Jesus is in the wilderness and being tempted by Satan. And one of the temptations Satan gave was, "Now, if you fall down and worship me, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world." He was trying to detract Jesus from his real mission. Well, Jesus told him that you can only worship God. And he said to him, "Be gone." Now, Jesus uses a different word when he talks to Peter. He said, "Get behind me, Peter. Get behind me, Satan. I cannot be deferred from the reason I came." Origen, one of the early church fathers, interpreted this passage in a unique way and probably has some good insight. Indeed, he said, what Jesus is saying to Peter, "You cannot direct my life. Indeed, you are to follow me and not ask me to live by what you want me to live." Indeed, that sounds like a good interpretation, doesn't it? You need to follow me. Now, obviously, Satan was not going to follow him. And to Satan, and as recorded in Matthew 4 and Luke 4, Jesus simply said to him, "Satan, get away. Go away. Don't come back." Well, Luke's gospel, the words are that Satan just left him for a season. And that's probably true, because we see this temptation coming up over and over. When Jesus was praying in Gethsemane on the night he was arrested, he was praying that the cup might pass from him. It was not that he didn't want to do the Father's will. Indeed, that's what he yielded to. But crucifixion was a horrible way to die. And so Jesus was saying, if it's possible, choose some other way. I know I've come for this purpose. I know that no one has really taken my life from me, but I'm laying it down on my own accord, because this is why I've come. Well, we know that Jesus was crucified. We know that he yielded and said, "Not my will, but yours be done." Well, Jesus also said to the disciples, if you really want to follow me, you have to learn how to deny yourself to do the will of God. And that's what Jesus did in Gethsemane. That's what Jesus was doing throughout his life. He kept saying, "I must be about my Father's business. And I can only say or do what my Father tells me to say or do." Now, to deny self means that we give up the right of self-rule. It means that we have a higher priority. It means that sometimes our will is not consistent with God's, and so we try to do God's will. Hebrews 13:2 talks about Jesus having joy by going to the cross. Does that sound like joy to face such an event? Well, Jesus had reasons for that. You see, by going to the cross, he was going to complete the plan of salvation and give every person the right to be reconciled to God and the way. Jesus also knew that he was returning to heaven and to the glory which he once had. And so instead of being a reason to have sorrow, Jesus had great joy even though he was facing a horrible experience. And Jesus said, you must take up a cross and follow me. Now, to take a cross is not to take our own burdens and our own cares and worries. It is to take the burdens of someone else. It's to realize there are people who need encouragement. It is to realize that we can offer our lives in encouraging one another and stand by their side, even as Jesus promises to stand by our side. Now, Jesus did not say every person is going to die by way of a cross or any other form of violence. He did say that there is the possibility of violence. There is the possibility of suffering because you believe in me. Well, sometimes in the midst of persecution, the people would deny the Christ in order to try to save their lives. In the terrorist movement in the Mideast and other areas, sometimes the Muslim terrorists, and not all Muslims are terrorists, don't ever think so, but some of the Muslim terrorists would attack buses and people, various places, churches, and they'd give Christians the option, deny self and become a Muslim or die. Well, some did deny Christ and some did not deny Christ and die. But Jesus was saying to them, you know, if you lose your own soul, what have you gained? You must be aware that you haven't gained anything. And one of the things that the world teaches us is that the one who is the most powerful, the one who has status, the one who has the most toys, is the person who is blessed. However, Jesus taught us the one who is possessed of God's plan and who tries to follow it is the one who is the happiest. Now, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians that the cross, the crucifixion, was a stumbling block to the Jews because the Jews, as recorded in Deuteronomy, considered that anyone who died on a tree was cursed of God, not blessed. And the Greeks thought it was very foolish that you talk about the cross. Gods didn't care about people. They just used them for playthings and didn't care about them at all. Well, Paul affirms that it is the cross and what Christ did there that gives us reconciliation with God. Our cross is not like Jesus's. Jesus' cross was one of atonement. And because of his cross, we have atonement and we are a redeemed society. But our cross is simply a way of encouraging people and to be with them. Our cross is something that we assume daily. We see responsibilities and opportunities, and so we try to help others, and that is our cross. We are bearing it by choice. We want to be available for God's kingdom. Jesus reminds us that we have forks in the road. We have to make choices. We can only choose to do one thing. We know we can't walk in two different directions at the same time, but we make other choices. In Deuteronomy, God says, I will set before you the way of life and death, and it's up to you to choose which you will follow. Well, we know that to choose to be kind, we have chosen not to be cruel. To choose to minister to others, we have chosen not to be selfish. We know that if someone fussily tries to protect their health, they primarily become a hypochondriac and not one willing to serve. But as we expend ourselves, our health may grow. If we want to have friends, we have to be friendly. That means that sometimes we have to deny our own rights and our own self-centered things in order to serve others. A seed that is planted in the ground has to die before it can live. And once it dies, the harvest can be bountiful. So in every aspect of life, we see that there is a fork. When we were in college, we had a friend that one day he had borrowed someone's car, and he was going somewhere, and he came to a fork in the road, and he didn't know where to go, so he just ran the car in the ditch instead of choosing a fork. Well, we have to make a choice. And basically there are only two choices. There's the choice of life or the choice of death. We either follow God or we follow something less than God. Now, if there were no choices, we would not be free. We would not be made in the image of God. However, if there are millions of choices, which we have in the world, that's no choice either, because it's too many choices, and that limits our ability. Well, Jesus reminds us that he's going away and that he's going to come back, and he had prophesied about the resurrection, but the disciples didn't grasp this until after he was raised. They didn't believe in a resurrection, even though they had been with Jesus when he healed the son of a widow of Nain, and when he had brought life back to a child that was the child of a ruler and had supposedly died according to the people. Well, Jesus reminds them that he's going to be raised. He indeed is going to be sacrificed, but he's going to be raised. And he says that some of the people will not, many of them will not pass away until they see the coming of his kingdom. Some interpret this as his reference to the second coming. I will come with my holy angels. However, a part of this is not about the second coming. Indeed, Jesus came back to people once he was resurrected from the dead. And those people who had been his followers, they saw his kingdom coming. They experienced the Spirit of the Holy Spirit falling upon them on the day of Pentecost. They felt his presence in the midst of trials and separation. They felt his challenges when he called them to responsibility. They were aware that Jews and Gentiles had been brought together, some at least. They were aware that even some of the people who had opposed Jesus became believers. And so this was evidence of his coming. His kingdom is built by people who know that God is real and that they are using their lives to witness in word and in deed so that others might also believe. Well, it costs us something to be a disciple, and the cost is that sometimes we must deny ourselves in order to do the will of God. But we cannot direct God. Listen to some of our prayers. They sound like, God, this is what I expect you to do, and I want it done now. And God keeps saying, I am the one to make the determination. Peter, you need to get behind me. You need to be aware that your thoughts are not the thoughts of God right now, but the thoughts of Satan. And Jesus did not condemn Peter, but he simply said, you've got to follow me. That's what it means to be a disciple. May we pray. Well, Father, help us to be aware of the cost of discipleship and help us to be willing to give it. For we pray in your name.